Wind scoured the crenellations of the red keep and pulled a raw moan from the flagstones, a sound like a ghost gone thin with hunger. In the council chamber, rushes smelled of cold salt and damp wool. Eddard Stark stood across from the high chair with the iron back, his hands folded behind him to keep them still. The candles guttered in the draught. Beyond, the windows looked down upon a black river traced with the fevers of 1,000 lanterns. Robert Baratheon's furred cloak hung loose around his shoulders, his broad face flushed from wine and the heat of anger that had carried him this far, anger that, to Ned's eye, had burned down to embers and ash. The king stared at the message on the table. Beside it, a little pile of broken wax. A three-headed dragon impressed deep in red. Varys watched with soft hands and softer eyes, mask-like, unreadable. Pycelle breathed as though drawing air through a reed. Littlefinger smiled with only half his mouth, the other half busy with some private arithmetic. Renly's gaze flicked between Robert and Ned, calculating the eddies of temper in the room as a man judges a tide. "She is a child," Ned said at last, aware that each word landed with the weight of a stone. "She is far, across the sea. She is no threat." Robert did not look up. His thumb dragged through the split wax, smearing dragon scales into nothing. "The last time we said those words, she was a babe in arms," he murmured. "Her brother had a beggar's crown and hunger in his eyes, and still I dreamed of his head upon a spike." "Dreams," Varys whispered. "The realm requires waking care, your grace. And what would your care purchase?" Robert rounded on him then, a flare of the old fire. "A knife smuggled past brown-skinned horsemen? Poison in a flagon? Send gold to some cell's word to stick a girl like a pig? You make me wish for a boar's honesty." Varys dipped his head, unruffled. "I recommend nothing the law forbids. A wise king prunes to keep his garden. And when he finishes, what remains?" Renly said, voice light, eyes bright. "A king with a handful of stems." Pycelle cleared his throat, pious and self-satisfied. "Your grace, mercy is the flower of—" "Be quiet." Robert did not shout. The word was iron-hammered flat. The old maester shrank back like a snail at a touch. Ned felt the air change. He sensed, without quite grasping why, that a hinge had turned. "Let it be written," Robert said, each syllable gravel underfoot, "that Robert Baratheon will not have the blood of that girl on his hands. I will not send knives over water. I will not be the butcher this palace would make of me. If she comes, she comes. We'll meet her in the field, steel against steel. That, at least, I understand." He looked to Ned then, not as a king to a lord, but as two men who had once stood knee-deep in river mud and blood. "Are you content, Stark? Is that the mercy you would have?" Ned bowed his head, the knot in his chest loosening to something like breath. "It is justice," he said, "and sanity." Littlefinger's half-smile did not falter, but something flitted behind his eyes, quick and dark. Varys's lashes briefly touched his cheeks. Pycelle nodded as though he had suggested the course himself. Renly uncoiled the smallest of smiles and hid it again. Robert pushed the letter away. For a moment his gaze drifted to the sword above the dais, the great father of swords. "There," he announced, and it was not triumph but weariness. "We are done with this folly." He looked around as the small council shifted, the way rats do when a lantern moves. "Now go, all of you. Leave me with my hand." They filed out. Littlefinger's heels clicked softly on stone. Varys floated like an evening moth. Pycelle's chain rasped. Renly paused at Ned's elbow, squeezed his arm with the quick intimacy of kinship, then was gone. When the door closed, the wind spoke again. Robert poured wine. He held one cup out to Ned and then, as if reconsidering, took it back, stared into it, and set it down untouched. "There was a girl once," he said, "small, freckled, quick as a wren. She would run along the river bank and dare the current to take her." He laughed, without mirth. "I never thought of her when the council talked. I thought of a dragon reborn to burn my keep. But the moment I saw your face, I remembered a child." Ned did not speak. He watched Robert's hands. They were big hands, scarred and thick with grips long since loosened. They had held hammers and hearts, and neither had fared well. "You were right to come south," Robert said. "Right to be my hand. I lose myself to these rooms. I hate them. I hate the silk, the gold, the way the air stinks of resin and soft candles. I was born to smash, not to sift." He moved to the window, drew back the heavy curtain, and the city flooded in shrill voices, a clatter of mule cart wheels, the far whine of a smith's hammer. "I wanted her dead," he added low. "Not for the safety of my people, not truly, but because the name Targaryen makes me feel like a boy again, weak and seeing my father's halls burn. I can be honest with you, Ned. I want to be honest at least once before whatever ends us chooses its hour." Ned opened his mouth, changed his mind, and instead set his hand on the back of the chair. "Honesty is a kind of armor," he said. "It does not stop every blade, but it keeps a man's own cuts from killing him." Robert huffed a laugh. "You and your northern wisdom." He turned back, and the look he leveled held gratitude and relief and a weight of other things, uncounted. "We pay for this mercy, I'll wager," he said. "Everything has its price." "Yes," Ned said, thinking of names copied into a plain hand. Rafter boys and barbers' apprentices and a black-haired child in a smith's shop who looked too much like the king. "Everything does." The wind gusted. The candles strained. Somewhere a dog barked twice, then fell silent. Across the narrow sea, a different wind combed a different. See, the vast and whispering grass, each blade its own fine knife. Daenerys Targaryen rode where the slope dipped and rose like breath. The saddle fitted her now, and the horse answered a nudge of her knee. She was not a child carried in a litter. She was Khaleesi, belly ripening with a future that moved at night like a fish under glass. Ahead, the Khalasar strung itself across the horizon, arrows of dust. Boys rode bare and wild, men with bells woven to show the counts of their victories, women leading pack-horses burdened with bright fabrics and bronze kettles. Slaves shuffling, eyes emptied into a flat glare. The smell of horse and sweat, of milk curds, leather, and the dry metallic tang of the grasses filled her lungs. It was a smell far from the lemon trees of memory. Jorah Mormont rode near, beard roughened with dust, the set of his shoulders attentive and careful. He followed her gaze to the far line where the land trembled in heat. "They'll reach water by moonrise," he said. "A narrow stream and shallow, but enough to fill skins. We'll encamp." "We?" she repeated quietly. She was not used to feeling the word in her mouth without fear. She liked it. "You have ridden long," he said, as if she might be argued to rest. "I am well." The child inside had three moods: stillness like a held breath, flutter like a bird's wing, and more now, a slow tidal rolling that surprised her. She pressed a hand to her gown without thinking, felt the shape of her own body and a wonder that was half terror. Khal Drogo was a dark shape on the ridge, falcon still. He did not look back. He hardly ever looked back, but she felt his awareness move to her as surely as if his hand had touched her shoulder. Illyrio's agents had brought her news in V's Dothrak upon braided heads and careful lips. The usurper's men asked to have her killed. She had watched the words pass through the air and settle, like ash hunted again, chased from one end of the world to the other by a man who never saw her face. It had sickened her. It had steeled her. She had stood straight and said nothing and met her husband's eyes at last. But that evening a different rider had come, thin as a reed, with a scroll like a bone. He had knelt and offered it up, and Jorah had watched the scraping of wax and the unfurling of foreign script. Later, by her own fire, Jorah had carefully translated, mouth shaping the hard consonants, pausing often. The king had spoken mercy. He would not have her hunted. If she came, they would meet as enemies in the open. Otherwise, the sea between would stay the sea. It was a strange mercy and felt like none at all. Yet that night she had slept without waking to imagine steps in the dark. Now, in the slanting sun, She watched a boy of 7 trying to bring a stubborn pony across a trickle of water that would be a stream by moonrise. The pony stopped and chewed and considered its life. The boy tugged and laughed. The beast flicked an ear. This was the shape of her days. 1,000 little images strung on a cord taut by a future not yet named. "They will raid soon," Yora said. He had a soldier's weight of voice, each word placed to bear a load. "Word is out that a Lazarene village sits a day to the south, rich with cattle, easy pickings. The call has been patient. He has not raided in your ripening. He will not be patient much longer." She looked at him and his eyes softened. "Say it," she told him. "They will take women." He did not flinch when he said it. She did not flinch either, though she felt again the old chill coil and tighten across her ribs. "No," she said. "No." He let the word hang between them, testing its weight. "You will tell a storm not to break? You will command the sea not to be salt?" "I will speak to him," she said. "I will ask. That is all a wife may do, and this wife is Khaleesi." She urged her horse forward. At the ridge, Drogo turned, slow as the turn of a great beast at a riverbank. Sun wrote bronze across his skin, shone in the bells of his hair. He watched her approach with a pride that was almost absence. His love for her was a landscape, not a flame. When she spoke, he listened. It had not always been so, but since her belly rounded, something solemn had entered him. The men would tell stories of it. She knew. The Khal who smiled less as the child grew inside the moon of his life, the man who began to weigh his battles. For a long time after she finished, he said nothing. The wind pushed her hair against her cheeks. She could feel the eyes of half a dozen blood riders note that the silence stretched and hold their breath with it. Drogo lifted his spear, rested it across his shoulders, and finally said a word that meant both promise and problem. "You are my life," he told her in his own tongue. "But the world has its own life. I can block a river with my hands for a heartbeat while water finds a way. Do not ask me to be quiet when the water breaks on women's bodies," she said. "Not when my child is listening." Later, when the moon rose, they did not ride south. They swept instead to the east, skirting the whisper of cattle. The men grumbled. Power changed texture, noise in the background, the sound of a long rope going taut. The next day, a band of raiders went out on their own and returned blooded and triumphant and proud. Drogo did not punish them. He said nothing. His face said a great deal. A week later, in a chance skirmish with another Khalasar on the edge of a burned place, a man called Mago used a curved blade with insult in his eyes. Drogo met him and left him in the grass and walked away with a red line opening along his ribs. The wound was not mortal. The wound did not know it wasn't mortal. By firelight, Daenerys watched the women clean it. She remembered the brittle hands of Mirri Maz Dur in a different world, a different telling. A pair of dark eyes like a well where anything might live. She sent the wise woman away. She asked for Boyle, de-water and white cloth. She sat with Drogo and told him a story without dragons and without kings, about an orange cat that had lived beneath her window when she was small, about how it had stolen figs and looked at her with human disdain. He lay very still and let her talk as the pain moved on its seabed. The scar healed badly then better. He did not die. Her child moved like a sure fish. When the time came, it was long and terrible and human. The scream she let loose opened her from throat to hips and beyond. When the child came, he came slippery and loud, angry at the light. The Khal held his son and looked at him not as a prophecy fulfilled, but as a man looks at a blossom on a hard tree, surprised and undone and helpless. They named him Rigo because she asked it, and because the name tasted like steel and starlight to her, and because the old had to be given to the new if the new was to be something more than a repetition with different clothes. The night after, alone under a sky like hammered tin, Yora stood guard and wanted to say that he had written to men across the sea about every flutter of that child's becoming. He wanted to say he was sorry for every letter. He wanted to say he had not known how to stop until he saw the boy's hands open and close like sea flowers. He did not say anything. Instead, He walked the perimeter and counted his breaths and let the grass cut his boots to whispering ribbons. In King's Landing, the city woke to the news of Tywin Lannister's banners rising along the Golden Tooth and whispers of gold moving like a tide under the walls of Harrenhal. The Lannisters did not like the memory of their prince called Dwarf dragged to the Eyrie by a woman with fire in her hair. They did not like the Hand who had refused to bend his neck to their convenience. They did not like much that could not be owned. When the men fell upon Ned in the street, golden armor with sunlight standing sharp on it, flashing like the fin of some deep fish, Jory Castle was quick and brave and died with his eyes fixed on a point above his killer's shoulder. The blade that laid Ned low was clean, the pain clear and honest. He shouted for his men and the words tasted of iron. After the world sloped and swam, he propped himself against a wall and watched blood drip from his boot to the crack between two stones where weeds dared to live. Jaime Lannister gazed down at him with a beauty like a knife. "This is a message," Jaime said, almost regretful, and turned his horse. Ned's retort, if there was one, fell out of him with the pain, unspoken. The king was away, hunting, but he returned not days later and not drunk enough for his absence to cover the stench. He came thunderous. He came with Barristan Selmy at his shoulder and Lancel pale and wide-eyed behind. He came to the yard where the Lannister men drilled, and he called for the heirs of the Rock to answer for the Hand's blood. Jaime had fled at dawn for Casterly Rock. Cersei knelt and did not kneel. Joffrey's mouth was a cruel line of the familiar and the false. The king looked from boy to mother to the stones underfoot and back, and something in him hardened to more than anger. It was a reckoning. "My hand bleeds from your pride," Robert said, voice low. He addressed the heir as much as her. "I was content to let you hate my bastards silently, and to squander my coin loudly, and to build a bright cage for me from wit and lies. But you will not break the men who served with me when the trident ran red. You will not snap the old bones of the realm and expect me to dance to the tune." Cersei said that she admired dance. She said it with eyes that offered 1,000 knives and a kiss. Ned lay in his bed and listened to the outcome in the voices of the Red Keep, rising and falling like wind. He slept and woke and slept and dreamed the river thick with sun and beasts and a boar that turned at the last to look at him, long lashes casting shadows over its eyes. When he woke fully, with his daughters' names in his mouth, Robert sat by the bed, smelling of leather and horse and the faint metallic taste of decision. "I need you," Robert said, "not to tell me what is right. I know that. To stand where I can see you when I nearly do the wrong thing."
Ned nodded.
"I am here," he said. It was that simple and that heavy. Letters ran out from the capital like starlings. To Stannis on Dragonstone, the king's summons. To the Riverlands, redress, redress, redress. To the Vale, to the north, to the Reach and the Stormlands. The king's call to hold the peace or see it enforced. Tywin answered with silence and preparations like a tied line of shields. The realm held its breath. What might have been a private war blossomed. The gate at the Golden Tooth saw men die with Lannister gold on them and Riverland mud under their boots. Ser Edmure Tully held Riverrun with a fury that made his father's old hands tremble with something like pride. Robb Stark, 14 and long-legged, stood on the ramparts of Winterfell and watched cranes lift from the moat and felt the first crack in the egg of a childhood too soon. Catelyn paced and counted rooms and imagined them as spaces to be emptied by grief. Then she lifted her chin and rode to Riverrun because her father's breath began to rattle like old paper. Sansa whispered prayers for a golden-haired prince who was not a prince, for she did not know which story she was in. Arya vanished into the cracked seams of the city with a thin sword and thinner patience and learned the names of butchers' men and bakers' wives and a boy who tied up cats by their tails. Littlefinger smiled and made a plan, then a second, then made certain the first two would bite the third at the perfect moment. Varys smiled and made no plans, only maps, and printed possibilities upon them with ink so pale only his eyes could read it. Robert did not die on his hunt for boar because he did not drink enough to make the spear a dream. The beast charged. He stood. The point went home and the weight of the body jarred his shoulders. He was thrown and rose, swearing gently, and the boar was a heap of muscle and bristle and gone life. They returned in a wash of noise, men laughing and cleaning and proud. Lancel, white and drawn, avoided Cersei's gaze for days and then did not avoid it, and thus began another story that bent around itself like a snake. With the king alive, the center held longer than anyone expected. Longer did not mean unbroken. Tywin was a man who had been insulted. A man insulted before the realm is like a storm ignoring the shore. He marched. Jaime rode out with him, bright as a coin. The riverlands burned in lines on the map, then in lines across the land, hard and black. The cries of cattle were a thick voice under the human sound. Robert called banners. Men came in a flood of dust and color. The Stormlands, the Reach in careful numbers, the Vale with eyes on its own suspicions, the North with a red wolf running before it like heat haze. Renly moved through camps like a bright fish through water, praised and flattering, beloved by men who had wives with ears. Stannis arrived with ships like a thought of knives, his jaw a granite line on which the realm could break or be sharpened. In the War Council, Ned stood at the king's right hand and watched two brothers who did not look at each other and a host of lords who looked at everything at once. Stannis wanted law, a cold and clear thing like winter water. Renly wanted love, which slips between fingers and binds just the same. Robert wanted victory without too much thinking. Ned wanted a world afterwards where children could grow old enough to be tired of bread. "The rock is the heart," Stannis said, tracing a line along the map to Casterly Rock. "But hearts do not bleed without the veins. We must cut at the supply. We take the Golden Tooth and then break Tywin between Riverrun and a host coming down from the west." "Break Tywin," Robert repeated, as though savoring the idea of snapping a bone. "Or force him to terms," Ned said. "A king takes oaths, not heads, when he can afford it." "When he can afford it," Renly echoed, amused. They marched. The king rode in the van, for he would not be contained in the soft belly of his army. Barristan watched him with a care like a prayer. Ned rode with him as far as the river and then, with a wounded leg that ached like a weather glass for storm, fell back to the part of a commander that lives with parchment and signals and eyes like hawks. The battle that followed was not glorious. No battle is. Men leapt at shadows and then found the shadows bit back. Amor rang. Horses screamed. The air filled with broken things and the taste of iron on the tongue. The North held a line and then gave ground and drew the enemy onto pikes. The Riverlords hammered from the left like a door shut too hard. In the afternoon heat, Tywin's men faltered. In the cool by sunset, they rallied beneath a crimson banner and returned and were met again. Out beyond, where the land sloped to low hills and a fringe of willow kept a trickle alive, Tyrion Lannister found himself cursing a saddle and then loving it and then hating it with the complicated intensity he reserved for his kin. He had come, improbably, to stand with a turned-out rabble he called his and then barely believed in until he watched them fight. He swung an axe. He did not die. Afterwards, he looked at his hands and thought of books and wine and the shape of sitting and the odd, unexpected weight of survival. Word ran quick as a stoat through winter grass. The king lives, Tywin withdraws. Not a rout, not an end. A breath between blows. In that breath, letters again. To Catelyn come. To Lisa. For the love of your sister and the oath to your king, come down from your mountain and be a friend to peace. To Tywin. You hold lands by the grace of a crown you now test. Consider how much grace remains. To Cersei. A private letter with a single sentence that no one saw, and that she burned and remembered. Jon Snow watched snow fall that wasn't snow, the shed feathers of 1,000 ravens beating the same thought toward the south. The wall held its own counsel, wordless and old, ice speaking as it cracked to itself. He had taken vows in the cold with the taste of salt on his tongue from tears he would not name. His sword's grip had warmed beneath his hand to the shape of his fingers. Beyond the trees, something moved that remembered hunger very well. He wrote to his father and then did not send the letter because the world in it seemed too small compared to what he had begun to sense in the wastes. Men were going missing like warmth from a dying fire. Tracks did not agree with the feet that made them. Ghosts' ears pricked to hollows in the night. When the first wildling came to the outer watch with a voice like torn cloth and a tail of blue eyes and hands that did not belong to any living man, Jon understood, in a way beyond words, how far South Cold can travel when it is angry. "Tell them," he said to the black-cloaked men older than fathers, and they nodded as if to say, of course, as if they had been telling forever and no one had lived quite long enough to hear. The raven that carried that message south arrived with feathers ragged and a hunger like a second beak. The letter was put in the hands of a steward, then a guard, then Varys, then Ned, then Robert. The king read it and grunted and read it again and blinked, as if to shift the words to a plane where he could see them as forces on a field. Stannis's mouth went smaller. Renly smiled with no mirth. Littlefinger said something about winter always making men melodramatic. Pycelle stroked his beard. Varys folded his hands and made his eyes soft with worry and thought of ships. Always of ships. "It is a fancy," Robert said at first. "Ghost stories to make boys in black feel braver." Ned looked at him and did not speak for a full breath. When he did, it was quiet. "Trust the men on the wall, Robert. For once, do not laugh at what you fear." "I do not," the king began, and then he closed his mouth. He looked at Ned again and saw, perhaps, the north itself in his friend's eyes. Stone and snow and a refusal to yield to things that weren't true. "We send men," he said, "and bread, and fletched arrows, and a lord to stand there and remember he is the king's arm." His gaze slid to the map, up the long pale blue smear of the wall. He touched it with his finger, lightly. "Benjen Stark is still gone, isn't he?" "Yes," Ned said, and the word was a whole. "We send more." They sent more. Not enough, never that. But more than men in black had seen in years: grain, salted meat, rabbits on hangers, candles, oiled leather, a line of carts that made a bruise along the king's road for weeks. It was something. Sometimes something holds floodwaters just long enough. Daenerys named the days by her son's laughter. She learned the weight of his body sleeping against her and the way he would grab a fistful of her hair and hold on as though he feared falling out of the world. Drogo watched them and smiled, and then remembered he had forgotten how to smile and did it again. The Khalasar's slow wheel across the plains brought them a new rhythm. Fighting men stopped to watch a child with a carved bone rattle. A woman sang. Once, near a pool that threw back a perfect piece of sky, a young rider fell from his mount and rose sputtering and cursing and grinning. A boy again. The letter that reached her then was in a packet of silks and spice and the smugness of a man who had purchased many lives with coin. Illyrio's hand wrote of ships and times and men with names like chain links, one fastened to another in a chain that he alone could see clearly. It said the king had refused to kill her. It said the realm was busy with itself. It said, "Come while they look away, or do not come and wait until the looking away becomes permanent." It said, "I am your friend." It said, "I am only ever my own." She showed it to Yora. He read it aloud and then lowered it and stared at the plain of grass as though it were a chessboard that did not know it was one. "He wishes to hurry the future along," he said. "Does the future obey hurry?" she asked. "It does when men like him choose the roads," he said. "But sometimes the road has a stone too large to be moved." She thought of the sea, and her stomach tightened in old fear. She had learned to ride. Sailing was another river with a different current. She could imagine crossing it with her son's weight in her arms and Drogo's hand on her knee and the wind saying things about chance. She could imagine, and the imagining was both blade and bomb. "We will not be chased into their game," she said. "Not until we are ready." "When will that be?" he asked. "When the boy can look at the world and think of it as his." Yora nodded, as if this were an answer a general might put on a map. He folded the letter and put it back among the things of the man they did not trust. Robb Stark crossed the twins with words, not swords. It is true that words sometimes cut cleaner. He did not yet have the face of a lord. He had the anxiety of a son and the awkward bravery of a youth who has learned that the world is heavier than he guessed and is still determined to lift it. Walder Frey named prices. Catelyn stood at her son's shoulder and bargained with years and marriages and fealties, and the patience of a woman who has known the tilt and turn of men's moods and knows how to keep a ledger under it all. Across a field churned to gray pulp, Robb took knights in red as prisoners and sent them bound but breathing to the king as a gesture. "See," he was saying, "see how the North remembers oaths and expects others to do the same." Robert received them with a grunt and a wash of wine and sent them to cells that smelled of damp straw and the low hum of waiting. Tyrion, delivered by the dangerous fortune that seems to prefer a certain kind of man, found himself again within the city walls with a mouth full of jokes and a mind full of accounts. He smelled the court and knew the game and wished, fervently, to play it better than anyone. He visited his sister with a smile like a knife hidden in fruit. He visited his nephew and taught him a word that meant mercy and waited to see if the boy could hold it without dropping it. He drank with the hand and told him a story about a beetle that rolled a ball of dung uphill because an ant told it about glory. Ned listened and turned the parable over as if it were a piece of coal he might eventually strike into flame. When the raven with the blue-sealed letter from the wall arrived, Ned took it to Robert himself. "I have known fear," Ned said when the king had finished reading. "I knew it at the Trident. I knew it in a snowstorm when I thought I had lost my brother forever beneath a drift. This is not that fear. This is older. It sits in the spine and whispers to bone." "You will remember I am not a man for whispers," Robert said, but he put his finger on the map again and left it there, as if naming a place with a pressure of flesh could count for something. "What do you want, Ned?" "From me." "Enough to stand a winter," Ned said. "Enough to carry the wall until the wind stops howling. Men who will not flee at the first tale of ghosts. I want the South to set aside its parlor feuds and remember that the North is part of the same house." Robert sighed and then laughed at himself for sighing. "You want me to be a king? God's help me." He pushed himself to his feet. "I will write. I will ride to the Sept and make a prayer no one will believe in. I will see to it the gold flows north until Lannisport complains it is wintering in Winterfell." He clapped Ned on the shoulder. "And you will keep my feet out of the worst puddles until the spring." "If spring comes," Ned said. "It always does," Robert replied. He said it as a defiance, not a certainty. Men ate, men shat, men sharpened steel. Women made bandages and bread and told children older stories to keep the new ones from climbing into their heads too soon. Cersei tightened the corruption she could lay her hands upon and loosened what she could not. Men like ropes left in the rain, ready to rot. Favors like bees, busy in the heat, stinging most what buzzed too close. Renly gathered smiles like coins and spent them lavishly. Stannis stood upon the crenellations of Dragonstone and watched a sea that refused to speak plainly and dreamed of a world in which men obeyed the shape of law as trees obeyed the wind, bending only so far. Littlefinger bought a ship with a name like a promise and sold another with a name like a joke and counted the difference at night under sheets of linen no one would remember touching but him. The realm held. Not forever. Not even for very long. But it held. In that holding, the true cold set its fingers on the northern forests. The others, who had not been seen by men who still remembered their fathers clearly, moved in a thought that was both slow and outside time, like ice itself deciding to speak. The first village to vanish went quietly, the lights like coins drawn one by one from a pocket, the dogs' voices going thin, then gone. The second left a pattern. The third left a warning pinned to a tree in a language only the oldest winds could read. Jon Snow went out with Qhorin Halfhand and a handful of men who understood that the gray between courage and stupidity often looks the same from a distance. They crossed a pass with edges like hungry mouths. They saw fires where no men were. They felt eyes on them that belonged in another story. When they killed, their blades steamed in a way that made the hair along their arms rise as if listening. They returned with fewer and with a certainty carved into them. Winter was not a season. It was a decision being made elsewhere. He wrote that certainty down and sent it south. It moved slower than it should have, through hands that wanted to smooth its edges and eyes that tried to blink it into something more ordinary. It reached the king. It reached the hand. It reached men who kept it in their mouths like a bad taste and kept talking anyway. On the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys watched her son find his feet and fall and find them again. She felt herself harden and soften in turn. She thought of her brother, who had been a kind of hunger made into a man. She thought of her mother, whom she barely remembered except as the feeling of a hand sheltering, then gone. She thought of a throne that had been a word in her mouth for so long it was almost a taste. She looked east and west and felt her own axis settle, a line drawn through her from crown to heel in which the world could spin. "We are offered ships," Yora said one morning, holding a scrap of news like a bone he was not sure he dared throw to the dog that watched him. "We are offered a life," she said. "Those are not always the same thing," he answered. "No," she agreed, looking at Drogo, who had lifted Rigo and set him upon a mare as if to say, see what you stand upon. "But sometimes they are." She slept that night and dreamed not of dragons but of a long road that crossed water on stones that revealed themselves just as her foot came down. She walked. She did not fall. When she woke, the noise of the Khalasar already lifted toward the pale sky, 1,000 small lives in chorus. Ned stood on a balcony that faced north. He could not see Winterfell from here. He could not even see beyond the hills that ringed the capital. But he stood there because he had discovered that he had to make a practice of looking toward home or risk forgetting the exact green of the gods would. Arya had crept into his chamber that morning at a dawn-lined hour and left a smear of dirt on his sleeve and a bit of string on his table. Sansa had cried in a way that felt like rain over stone, not a storm so much as a wearing down. He had held both kinds of sorrow and not known how to fix either except by standing steady long enough for the world to tire of pushing. Robert came out and leaned his great weight on the parapet and looked, as if by force of will alone, beyond where eyes could carry. "Do you ever wish," he asked, "that we had lost at the Trident?" Ned turned, surprised. "No," he said. "Do you?" "Sometimes." Robert's mouth twisted. "It would have been simpler. Clean end. A story with fewer pages. But then I think of children born since. My bastards and yours and every pig boy and washerwoman's girl, and I cannot wish an end for all the beginnings. I can only wish to be a better king for them." He laughed then at himself. "Listen to me. I've grown soft as butter." "No," Ned said. "You've grown true." He paused. "It is a different sort of hardness." Below, a bell rang the hour. The sound hung like a drop of melted bronze. Men moved. Women moved. The sea breathed beyond the city. Far away, in a place where horses outnumbered trees, a boy had learned that falling was practice for running. Far north, on a wall of ice that held the sky like a shelf, a man looked out and saw the cloud line misbehave and knew that the world, which had never been his to command, would also not be his to abandon. The raven Robert sent that night bore the seal not of the crown but of the man. Its message was brief and lacked the polish of Pycelle's phrases. It asked, not ordered. It told the lords of the south that the north remembered their names, oak and rose and fish and grape, and asked them to remember, in turn, the cold that does not spare banners. If a few smiled and set it aside, others read and felt the old sense of the realm as a single room with a single roof, and were embarrassed by it in the way one is embarrassed to find an old toy in a drawer and feel a pang. War did not end because a king kept a girl alive across water. War seldom ends back. As of one mercy, but that mercy turned something slightly humanly, and other things turned after. A man bled in a street and lived. A woman refused a clever midwife who would have bought life with a bargain that unmade what it saved. A boar died in a forest and a king did not. A boy learned to be his father's son by crossing a bridge with his heart in his throat. A wall that had been a legend became again a purpose. Messages moved like beads on a string from one pair of hands to another, and some of them were believed. The night before the next battle, Ned walked the camp. Fires were pools of orange in the dark, smelling of fat and damp wood. Men played at dice with faces as blank as prayer. Somewhere a flute tried to remember a tune and failed and tried again. He paused by the royal pavilion and listened to Robert snore, loud and ridiculous and comforting in a way he could not explain. He went on to where the north had pitched its tents and stopped outside one where a low voice droned and another laughed softly and then hushed, as if the laugh itself might call ruin down. He thought of his sister. He did not try to imagine what she would have been if she had lived. He had learned not to reach that far. He thought instead of her hair tangled in late summer and the way she would throw her head and chase a horse that did not need chasing. He thought of his father's last look, not terror but astonishment, and he let himself feel the ache without letting it eat him. He stood there and sent a piece of himself like a small careful bird across miles, to Winterfell, to the wall, to the wide plain where a young mother held her child and a man with bells braided into his hair kept watch and learned the stubborn patience of the wounded. At dawn, the mist lifted as if a hand drew back a veil. Rows of men became a pattern. The field, mud and churn and grass, became a kind of board on which the pieces knew the shape of their moves and moved anyway. Before he mounted, Ned lifted his face to the sky and let the weak sun soak into him as far as it could go. "Mercy," he said, though no one stood there to hear him and the word itself bent under a weight of other words. Duty, law, love, fear. He fitted his foot into the stirrup and swung up into the day that was going to happen whether he wanted it or not. And in the breath of that girl and the catch in a king's voice and the holding of a friend at a window that faced north, futures lengthened, narrowed, coiled and uncoiled. The battle took men and left men and taught both kinds of survivors something about themselves they would not yet admit. Night fell. Snow somewhere hardened into a sheet. Grass elsewhere made a sound like an army creeping forward. In the city that held the Iron Throne, thousands of candles were snuffed in order by hands that knew the paths through darkness. No drums announced the turn of fate. No gods descended to mark the hinge. The hinge was, as it often is, a man with a mouth full of bitterness deciding to swallow it, and a man with a mouth full of wine deciding to leave the cup alone, and a woman with a child on her hip deciding to speak and be heard. The story, messy and human, walked on. From the wall, a raven went out by night with frost on its wings. From the east, a rumor went out by day of ships being built where no river gave itself easily to the sea. From the south, ripe fruit fell and fattened rats and children and men playing at kings. From the west, wind off the sunset sea brought the smell of rain. Above, stars arranged themselves without comment into a pattern no one alive would ever understand. When the snow at last began to fall in the capital, light, early, the city's first shiver, Ned stood again on the northern balcony and held a hand out to catch a flake. It dissolved at once to a cold ghost on his skin. He looked down and saw Arya chase the same flakes along a wall more nimble than fear, saw Sansa lift her face to catch them on lashes dyed with grief and patience. He thought, briefly, that the gods, if any looked, were watching to see how men behaved with such a small and simple magic. He decided to behave as if watched. Robert joined him and did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was low. "It was easier," he said, "to hate the girl across the sea. Easier than hating my own weakness. I am not proud of that. I will not pretend I have become a good man because once I refused to be a monster. But I will refuse again when I can."
Ned nodded.
Far away, a child squealed again, 2 continents worth of air thinner for the sound. Far north, a horn blew once and then again, and men looked up with their breath blowing white and their lives standing up inside them as if to take a blow. Close by, in the tower behind them, a spider wrote and a mockingbird sang and 1,000 plans knit themselves like wool in the hands of a patient grandmother. Snow, ash, dust, and blossoms laid their small proofs upon the world. Somewhere, seed hardened itself for a cold it did not understand. Somewhere, a blade learned the shape of the man who would hold it. Somewhere, mercy turned a corner and found that, for the moment, it could walk unafraid through a corridor of fear. Day came. Night returned. The realm balanced on the edge of winter and the question deeper than law or blood. What do we protect when we protect a name? A throne? A field? A child? In this telling, the first answer had been a life that was not taken. The others would have to be argued and bartered and bled over and prayed into place. Men and women went about the terrible, ordinary work of making that possible. Above them all, the sky kept its secrets and the world turned on the strength of small refusals and the brief courage they allow. The snow did not last. By noon it had turned to a thin rain that ran off the slates like sweat and left the city smelling of iron and smoke. The memory of it clung, though, a small sign stitched into the day, pulling at thoughts like a burr on wool. Ned found himself glancing north more often, as if he might read that part of the sky like a letter. The maester laid out the Book of Lineages, a fat ledger bound in cracked leather that smelled of powder and old bees. Ned turned the pages without haste. There had been a time he would never have thought himself the sort to study hair and eyes and the whims of inheritance like a septon puzzling a text. There had been a time he thought swords and oaths were language enough for any problem. War had taught him the lie of that, and the city taught it again daily. He followed the careful hand through Baratheon after Baratheon. Black of hair, black of hair, black of hair, in such steady copy that it became a drumbeat. Black, black, black. He paused only to rub at his leg when it complained and to lift his cup when Jory would have once leaned in with a mutter and a grin. The empty space where Jory would have stood was as real as any page. When Stannis Baratheon arrived in the Solar, he carried his own weather with him, a cold that did not melt in this weak southern rain. He did not look at the wine. He did not look at Ned's limp. He looked at the book and then at Ned, as if measuring what had been seen and what had not. "You have come to the same place," Stannis said. His voice could have been the scrape of a blade against stone. "Jon Arryn saw it before any of us. He was killed for it." "I have come to suspicion," Ned said. "A suspicion large enough to be a road a man might walk to a conclusion. But I will bring the king only what a man can nail to a door." Stannis's mouth tightened, and in that tightening was a complicated thing. Relief twisted with irritation, respect strangled by impatience. Good. The king must hear. The king must act. "He will hear," Ned said. He thought of Robert on the balcony, of snow vanishing on a warm palm. "As for act, he will act," Stannis said. The certainty was not confidence so much as a threat offered to the future. "He has delayed too often. The Lannisters grow bold when the king lets them eat from his table." "Bold and cornered," Ned said. "A cornered animal bites at anything. Then best to cut its head." Ned shut the book. "And how many heads do you reckon the rock has?" Stannis did not answer. He stepped to the window and stood where Robert had stood, but he did not look north. He looked at the city, its coils of lanes and roofs, the fleck of masts, the gray smear of the river. "Cersei's children are not the king's blood," he said low. "They are bastards born of incest and treason. The law is clear." Ned felt the weight in the room change, as if a smith had set a hammer down. "The law is clear," he agreed. "The law does not say what a man's heart will do when it is asked to cut where it once kissed." "You are hand," Stannis said. "You will hand him the blade." "I will put truth in his hand," Ned said. "I cannot make him use it clean." Stannis gave a single, minimal nod. "Then do it. Swiftly." He hesitated, then added, as if the words cost him, "You are not my enemy, Lord Stark." "Nor you mine," Ned said. The admission felt less like alliance than the absence of a wound. That night Ned dreamed not of snow but of an anvil glowing red, his father's smiths bending bar to bar into a gate. When he woke, the sky was the color of dull coins. He sent for the king. Robert came with Barristan at his back and the smell of hounds and leather in his wake. He sank into a chair and took the cup he had rejected the last time, and then set it aside again, and that alone told Ned more than any words could have. "An early hour for books," he said, gruff without malice. "This is the hour for truth," Ned said. He pushed the ledger forward and lifted a second, slimmer book with a list of bastards he had quietly, painstakingly found. Gendry the armorer's boy, the girl in the street of silk, the child in a village under Storm's End whose hair shone like a crow's wing. He spoke their names softly, as if a loud voice might call a punishment down upon them, and set each beside the drumbeat of black. Robert listened, his face first skeptical, then grim, then something else. Tired. He put a finger to a page and did not move it. At last he said, "Say it plain, Ned." Ned drew breath and let it out slowly. "Joffrey is not your son, nor are the others. They are Cersei's by Jaime Lannister." The room did not move. A fly explored the rim of the wine cup and lifted, bored. Barristan stood so perfectly that he might have been carved. Robert's lips parted. He looked at Ned the way a man looks at a field where he will have to bury something he has loved and hates for dying. "By the gods," he said. His voice had dropped. "By all the gods." He did not rage. He did not throw the cup or punch walls or call for heads. He sat with the book a little way from him and his hands empty. He had found, it seemed, the one time that his anger could not find a purchase. "How long?" he asked. "Since before." Ned would not say Lyanna's name in this room with this subject in the air. He would not give the past to this particular now. Jon Arryn saw. Stannis saw. "I only stumbled onto the road they walked. Forgive me for not walking faster." Robert's laugh was a break in stone. "Forgive," he said. "We stand here with forgiveness in one hand and a map of hell in the other." He lifted the wine now and drank and grimaced as if it burned. "If this is true, then I have sat a fool and a cuckold and a father to another man's seed." "It is true," Barristan said. His voice was very soft. "Forgive me, your grace. The boy's face is Lannister to the core, and I should have seen before now what my old eyes would not see. I served your father. I failed him in the end. I would not fail you as well." Robert made a motion with his hand, complicated and helpless. "What do we do?" he asked Ned. "Tell me that, old friend, and I will do it even if it means tearing part of myself away." "You name your heir as the law commands," Ned said. "You disinherit the children without naming the manner of their bastardy. Let the record say they are not of your body and leave it to those who must to calculate why. You put Cersei aside. You demand the rock-bend knee. You offer terms, and if they refuse, you fight a clean war with the realm at your back." "Stannis," Robert said. A word like a stone dropped into a well. "The law says so," Ned said. "He is your brother. He will not gild the crown with grace, but he will hold it as a man holds a sword." Robert shut his eyes. For a moment the boy he had been looked out from behind the thickness of his cheeks. Then the king opened his eyes and they were blue and bloodshot and human. "Send for my brother," he said. "Send for Renly as well. I would rather hear his mockery at my table than his plotting in my halls. Bring Cersei." He rose and swayed and did not fall. "No," he amended. "I will go to her." He looked at Ned. "Walk with me." They went like men to a gallows, bare of escort save Barristan, who made no sound and whose face was the face of a man who had seen too many oaths broken and kept and knew too well that both cost. The corridor was cold. The rain hissed at torches set too near arrow slits. A maid ducked out of their path with a bow so low her forehead nearly brushed flagstone. The king's boots struck their own drumbeat. Ned's limp made counterpoint. Cersei met them in a room that smelled of myrrh and crushed rose and had its own weather, warmer than the rest of the keep by some small sorcery of braziers and heavy drapes. She had a cup in her hand and a robe of pale green silk that fell like water across her shoulders. Lancel stood a little behind, pale with the devotion of a youth who has discovered a god who smiles upon him and requires sin instead of prayers. Two handmaids went still as lizards under a hawk's shadow as the men entered. "My lord husband," Cersei said, as if greeting a guest who had arrived an hour late. Her eyes flicked to Ned, and the gold of them did not change. "Lord Stark." "Ser Barristan." "How dreary you look." "Drink another," Robert said, and his voice was so even that Ned was nearly afraid of it. "It will make us less dreary." "I prefer my companions to improve themselves," she said. "I have tried for years to polish one of you. The result is not pleasing." Her gaze slid to Ned and then, for the smallest instant, sharpened. She smelled a blade, perhaps, under his cloak. Robert did not bandy words. "Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are not mine," he said. "You made them with your brother. I will not ask you to deny. I will not hear lies in my own house." The silence that followed was not shocked. It was like the silence after a bell is struck. The sound rides it. Cersei's expression did not change immediately. Then something like relief, horrible and free, touched the corner of her mouth. "That took you long enough," she said. Lancel made a sound, the kind a stag makes when the spear finds it first and the stag does not yet believe it. Barristan's hand tightened on nothing. "You might have spared me the years," Robert said. "I would have spared you as well." "Spare me?" she said, the quiet rising to a blade. "From what? From being sold like bad wine to a man who always wanted another woman's taste? From filling my mouth with sweetness so I would not spit when you touched me? You speak of sparing now? How rich! Spare you from my justice," Robert said, and the evenness cracked. "Spare your neck from the cord. Spare your children, from the axe." Cersei's lips curved. "Ah," she said, "there he is. The king who knows nothing but killing and Her eyes landed on Ned. She chose a different word with a delicate curl. "And whoring." "Enough," Robert said. He sounded tired again. "We will not talk about the past. It is a midden and I have waded through enough today. This is what will happen. You will be set aside. You will not be harmed if the rock bends the knee. The children," he swallowed as if the word itself were a fishbone, "will be declared not of my body and found places where they might grow without the crown upon them. You will not go to them." Cersei's hand whitened on the cup. "You think you can keep a lioness from her cubs?" "I know that I am king," Robert said, and for a moment the room remembered. "And that when I have an arrow to my bow and game in my sights, I do not miss." She stared at him. The calculation behind her eyes moved like a snake under linen. Then she inclined her head, as if the gesture were a blade turned with exquisite slowness. "You will not see Tywin's banners here again," she said. "Not unless he comes to tear the city down around your ears." "Then he may come," Robert said, "and I will meet him at the gate. Say to him that I will hang his daughter if he tries to make me hang his son." He looked at Ned. "Send the letters. Call the banners again. Stannis is heir." Cersei's mouth twitched as if she would spit and decided not to muddy her own floor. "Stannis," she said, "the realm will love that. You do not crown a winter with frost. You crown summer with gold," Robert said. "See how that turned out." He turned and went, and Barristan with him. Ned lingered only long enough to see the way Cersei's hand trembled when she set the cup down and how quickly she clenched it into stillness again, and then he followed his king. Word went out like a shock through the veins of the city. It traveled with speed and was denied with equal speed in some houses, as if denial might alter its course. The Red Keep felt it in the shoulders of the guards and the tightness around the mouths of scullions. The gold cloaks felt it and shifted, the way a herd does when the first scent of wolf lifts. Varys felt it and smiled at a point in the air no one else could see. Littlefinger felt it and began to count the steps between certain doors and the river. Renly felt it, and his grin, when it came, had too many teeth. The Raven for Dragonstone found Stannis before his breakfast had settled. He read and read again, and then ordered a ship made ready for the capital and a second for a messenger to Storm's End, where the grim Granite had already heard and was mulling the sound. He did not speak to Melisandre. She had come to Dragonstone a fortnight past with a fire in her eyes that made men misunderstand their own petitions. Stannis had listened to her once, and then refused to listen to anyone else until the voices in his head resumed sounding like his own. He would come to King's Landing armed with law, not flames. In the Reach, Lord Mace Tyrell puffed like a bellows and affected to begrudge the king while measuring with swift and shrewd eyes the new lay of the field. Renly arrived at Highgarden with a troop of handsome young men and a bouquet of charm, and Marjorie walked in gardens with him and laughed into her hand and came away with the precise impression she wanted. That Renly might carry a crown upon his hair like a wreath and wear it lightly. In the Riverlands, Tywin read the king's proclamation by candlelight and then sat for a very long time without moving at all. At last he said to his brother, "He is not the king I thought. He has decided to be the one I dislike more." Kevin nodded, weary and loyal and too old for surprise. "We retreat to Lannisport," Tywin said. "We do not scatter. We do not rout. We buy time with coin and offense with caution. Jaime holds the crag and writes letters he has no patience to write." He stared at the candle until the flame wavered as if under a breath. "Cersei is to be removed," he said. as if trying the shape of loss and fury in his mouth. We will see how long he holds to that when his brothers snarl at each other over a bone. Tyrion, when he was shown the handbill nailed to a post by the fishmonger's square. Stannis Tob named heir, in Pycelle's heavy, officious script, felt the oddest sensation, relief sharp as a cut. He did not bother to ask himself why. He knew already. With Robert alive, there was at least the possibility that justice would be something more than a stick to beat one's enemies with. With Stannis in line, there was a shape to the future instead of a rumor. He stood before the ragged paper until a boy with a basket of eels bumped his hip and then moved aside and followed the boy and bought an eel and ate it with his hands like a man agreeing to live in the city as it was, not as men said it had once been. Robb Stark received the king's command to hold fast and maintain the trident crossings with a long breath that shivered, then steadied. His mother took the letter from his hand and read it and smiled with her mouth and not her eyes. "He is a better king for living longer," she said, which was both a comfort and a warning. "We will hold." At the wall, Jeor Mormont sat alone with the raven returned from the south and the taste in his mouth of a winter ale left too long in a cask. "They are sending men," he said aloud to no one. Then, as if embarrassed to be seen talking to emptiness, he rose and went to the courtyard where the boys hacked at straw men and the old hands watched and pretended not to care. "Snow," he said, and Jon turned as quickly as a dog to its name. "You saved my life. That is something. I'll not have a boy who does such a thing for his commander and then thinks he is a man. You are a boy and you'll be one until I tell you otherwise. Now take this blade and keep your damned hands off fire without my order." He thrust Longclaw at him again, as if repetition would anchor the gift to the world. Jon took it and felt the wolf's head in the pommel meet his palm like a creature greeting its pack. That night the white they had burned the week before visited Jon in his dream, and in the dream it had a mouth and spoke blue. When he woke, Ghost was standing at the door with fur bristled, staring not at the door but past it, at something that named itself with a cold that bled through wood. Jon stood, fingers finding the grip of the new steel as if it had grown there. He put his back to the fire. He waited. When nothing came, the fear did not leave. It lay down quietly in the room, paws under its chin, and watched him with white eyes until dawn. Daenerys Targaryen entered V's Dothrak with the sky low and gray and a taste of coming snow she could not have named. The mother of mountains rose, the bones of a god's fist curled against the world. The lake mirrored a sky that looked back with no secrets. The Dosh Khaleen received her as a queen and a daughter and an object of scrutiny. They took Rhaego from her arms and weighed him as if the meat of him were a coin they might judge for true stamp. They touched his brow and his chest and the fold of his ear. An old woman with skin like very old parchment breathed upon him and sniffed as if his future had an odor. "Stallion." One of them hissed in a voice that had missed its own strength since middle age. "He will mount the world." Daenerys did not bow to the word as she had once. She let it stand and did not live in it. She looked at her son. Not the world's horse, only hers, and kissed his hair. He smelled of milk and dust. Drogo went among the khals and listened to what men call prophecy when it suits and luck when it does not. He rode with the Ba. Ring of a man who expected his name to be repeated by mouths not yet born. He had always been that. He returned to his wife with the stillness in him that meant he was thinking of distances. "They say the boy is a storm," he told her. "Storms end," she said. "We will teach him to be also rain." He smiled, slow and rare. "You are strange," he said, as if it were praise. He grew solemn. "Ships have been offered again. Many ships. The sea is a small dog when enough men beat it." "The sea drowns men who beat it," she said. "And horses which do not know how to be small." He looked toward the lake where boys tried to push one another in and then shrieked at the cold with joy. "We will wait," he said. "We will gather. The boy will learn to sit a horse and a man and the world. When he says go, we will. Not before." She did not question that he believed the boy would speak the word and command the world to kneel. She wondered whether the world would listen, and if it did, whether it would be a better world for obeying. In the market of the coppersmiths, A Carthene with eyes like polished olives watched her with interest and offered bolts of silk so fine a breeze could carry them. He spoke of a city beyond sands where gates shone like jewels and men bargained with air and water. She listened and did not commit herself to his story. She bought 2 lengths of cloth that would not itch her son's neck. Jorah Mormont wandered the alleys upon one purpose and stumbled upon another. He had intended to find a man who knew a man who owned a ship. He found instead a small priest with a shaved head who spoke enough of the common tongue to be understood and spoke of dead things walking. Jorah stood under a canopy of drying sinew and heard a tale from a trader returned from the northmost ruins, where the grass gives way to cracked earth and men's maps name monsters instead of villages. Most tales were of splendor or trickery. This one had the spareness of bone. He carried it back to Daenerys and found she had heard something like it in a dream. Ice underfoot, the same shape again and again, a line of men with black upon them, torches guttering in a wind that did not blow. Dreams, Jorah said. Dreams often tell us what we fear, she said. The trick is to understand if the fear is a child's or a woman's. She lifted Rigo to her shoulder, and he put a greasy hand upon her cheek and patted, as if to make sure she was the same shape she had always been. This is what I fear, she said. Losing the things I need to be myself. Not winter stories. In King's Landing, the September of Baelor filled to its great ribs, the air thick with the smell of incense and damp wool and the press of breath. The High Septon, a man who had grown heavy on a diet of sycophancy and pastry, intoned with swollen dignity the sanctity of vows and the justice of kings. Robert stood beneath the stranger's gaze like a man under a cartwheel he had decided to hold with his own shoulder. Cersei stood to one side in simple gray and watched with the stillness of a cat before it strikes. Stannis stood as if carved. Renly, all green and gold and smiles for everyone else, kept his eyes on the queen's face when she was not looking and frowned. The king declared that the children were not of his body. He did not say why. He named Stannis as his heir. The murmur that followed was not brief. It moved through the hall in a wave and came back against the pillars and turned and rolled again. The High Septon lifted his hands and spoke of order, which amused the gods if they were listening. Robert declared that the queen would be set aside to the rock and kept in comfort until such time as the realm could afford the scandal of her trial. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. Both sets of eyes met in the space between them like swords crossed without hands. After, in the small hall where decisions are digested and made into other decisions, Renly stepped to Robert with the speed of a man catching a coin as it is tossed. "Set her aside quickly," he said, bright and helpful. "Then marry anew. The realm loves weddings and forgets divorces when fed with enough wine." Robert stared at him. "Have you a bride in your pocket?" he asked. He did not sound curious. He sounded tired. "Half a dozen," Renly said, cheerful. "But one would do. Marjorie Tyrell would put flowers on a field that has seen too much mud. Highgarden would be your ally by marriage, not only by convenience and greed." "The Reach will be my ally anyway," Robert said. "They grow fat on peace. They will not risk losing the markets of the capital to Lannisport out of wounded vanity." "You are not entirely wrong," Renly said, as if conceding a point in a game to a child. "But a wedding would make right what your temper will make wrong." Stannis stepped in with all the warmth of an undertaker. "He will not marry while he is bound in law," he said. "The faith will not countenance it. When the trial is concluded and the annulment is inked in proper order, then the king may do as he pleases. Until then we will have propriety." "I will have ale," Robert said, "and peace from your quarreling in my ear. There will be no wedding until there is no wife, and the wife will be sent west as a hostage to good behavior until her father judges his pride can stomach obedience. If we have to fight, we fight. If we have to sit and grow old while the west pouts, we will sit and grow old. Either way, I will see my bed tonight without 2 brothers howling down both ends of it." "We howl for the realm," Renly said lightly. "You howl for yourself," Stannis said. "And you for the law because it is the only wife who will have you," Renly returned, and Robert's glance silenced them both. Ned did not waste the day on their music. He set to the wires that would keep the city from ringing with a different sound. Steel on stone. He met with Janos Slint and looked in the man's small, flat eyes and measured how cheaply he could be bought and how dearly he would sell the things he could steal. He assigned northern men to the gatehouses where he could and reach men where he could not, and watched carefully which Lannister servants took leave on which days and how many trunks went with them. He did not forbid movement from the rock to the capital and back again. He counted it. It is often better, he had learned, to let a man think himself unobserved when your notice makes him cleverer. Arya found him in the dusk, shadow-thin and bright with a secret. "Father," she said, and made a face at the word, as if it did not contain enough of what she meant. "I heard 2 men in the walls." He looked at her closely. "Where were you?" She hesitated, then squared her small shoulders and told him the truth quickly, as if words were rabbits that might escape if she spoke them slowly. He let the reprimand be a promise in his eyes and not a rope around her story. She told him about a fat man and a spider, about talk of a war being delayed and a wolf and lion snarling for it and another beast entirely that would profit from the confusion. She spoke of a yellow king with perfumed hair who wanted to open gates and let Dothraki ride the streets. She did not know the names Illyrio or Varys. He could supply them. He did not tell her. He only nodded and sent her to show him the way. The tunnel smelled of dust and old air. Men's voices carried differently. Stannis, with the fleet, cut Lannisport's trade to a trickle until men in the city ate stale bread and grumbled at their lords. Robb Stark tightened his fingers around the ford like a boy holding a cat that might scratch him and did not let go. Edmure Tully wrote that he would hold the red fork until his sword hand withered to a twig, and Catelyn rode out to meet her father's men with a hood drawn low and a heart that had learned a new trick, beating hard and steady at once. Tyrion went west because his father summoned him, and because the city was not yet ready for what Tyrion might be. He went with Bronn at his side and a bag of jests and a mind that seldom slept. He met Shagga, son of Dolf, in a pass where the mountains liked to chew men's bones, and persuaded him not to. He arrived in his father's tent unbloodied enough to be laughed at and clever enough to be listened to. Tywin looked at him with the gaze he reserved for horses. Appraising, dispassionate, faintly disappointed that this one did not take as much weight as the others. Tyrion told him that he might not carry weight, but he could unbuckle harness and make a warhorse stumble, and Tywin smiled the shadow of a smile. "You will go to Lannisport," Tywin said. "You will keep the city from tearing itself apart while I work. You will make the small folk love us again, or at least learn to stand in the street when we ride by without spitting. Do it with bread. Do it with jokes. Do it with hanging thieves in pairs and making them look like art. I care only for result." "And my sister?" Tyrion asked. Tywin's eye moved as if a fly had passed. "Has made her bed," he said. "She will lie in it. If the king removes her to the rock, she will keep to her rooms. She will not plot beyond the walls of her own vanity. If she does, she will find the alarm of the keep does, in fact, still work." "She will try," Tyrion said. "She is very much your daughter in that regard." Tywin accepted the barb as if it were a spoonful of soup with gristle in it. Unpleasant but hardly fatal. "Your nephew is a boy, and your father," Tywin said, "is tired of boys who make messes." Stannis arrived in the capital with the sea salt still crisping on his cloak, and the smell of law about him so strong that even Littlefinger coughed as if at incense. He saluted the king and did not bend. He met his brother Renly in a hall, and there was a look between them that might once have been love in a different house in a different story. They did not touch. They did not insult one another openly. They nodded like men who had agreed to keep their knives in sight and not in the dark. "We stand," Stannis said to Ned when they were alone with parchment between them, "on the edge of an order. If the king weakens now, all you have built will be broken with a fingertip." "He knows," Ned said. "He thinks he knows," Stannis corrected. "He is thinking like a man who will always be there to lift the hammer. He will not always be there. By la W he has done a thing that cannot be undone without tearing more cloth than the realm can afford. By men's hearts he has done a thing that will split houses for a generation. The Tyrells will smile and count dowries. The Lannisters will sharpen. The Stormlands will march because I tell them to. The Vale. Lisa will not come, Ned said. She has retreated into her own fear and dances there. We may count the Eyrie only in its absence. Stannis's mouth went that small, hard line again. Then we plan as if alone. You were born planning alone? Ned said, and for once Stannis almost smiled. At the wall, a second corpse woke that had never been truly dead, and this time the fire took too long to find it. A ranger lost 2 fingers to the cold bite of the thing's mouth, and another lost his nerve. Jon kept his. It was not pride. It was that the world narrowed sometimes to a hole only wide enough for one act, and if you do not do that act you will fall through the hole and be part of the dark forever. After, Jeor Mormont put his hand on Jon's shoulder and left it there longer than rank allows. South will not believe what we say, he said. South might listen to who says it. Your father has the king's ear. Speak to him for us. Jon thought of the distance between his mouth and his father's ear, of the thick muffling of duty that lay between. He wrote anyway. He did not write like a son to a father. He wrote like a man to another man and called him Lord Stark and said plainly, if the first snows in the capital have already melted, know that the snows here will not. He described the way a cold hand felt when you cut it and the sound it made upon the floor afterward. He described a fear that had nothing of childhood in it. He sealed the letter with hands that did not shake and sent it with a raven that bit him and flew as if glad to be doing something it had been born for. The letter arrived with 4 others and a report of the price of wheat in Old Town and news of a small riot at the Hook when a man named Pete claimed a fishmonger had shorted him a pound of eel, and the fishmonger claimed she had done no such thing. The riot had taken 2 teeth and 1 eye, and someone had stolen a crate of turnips in the confusion. Ned read the letter from his son with a stillness he had learned at the Trident when arrows fell like rain. He took it to Robert within the hour. The king read it and said nothing, and then said, "This is a world I do not know, but I will not leave it only to the old and the cold." He ordered 100 more men sent north and 50 barrels of oil and the best of the cheap steel and the worst of the expensive. All that he could spare without weakening his hand at home. He did not pretend it was enough. He did it anyway. It is a kind of courage to do the thing that is not enough. Cersei went west under guard, not like a queen but not like a prisoner either, in a brown cloak and a hood and with only a few jewels hidden where only a lover would look. She left Lancel behind with a word that was either a promise or a curse and did not turn to watch the city recede. Her departure was quiet. It had the weight of a stone dropped from a height, invisible until it strikes. The day after she left, a baker's daughter in Flea Bottom hung herself for love of a gold cloak who had promised her a better room and then failed to appear. The city mourned more loudly for her than for the queen. The day after that, a man in the Riverlands sent a letter telling of a farm found in silence with doors open and dogs dead, and a kettle boiled dry and the food in it burned to a crust. The letter smelled of smoke, though the man had likely not meant it to. Little things turn large with the right wind. On Dragonstone, Melisandre stood on the battlements and threw something small and black into a brazier and smiled a smile that was not warm. She watched the smoke writhe as if a thing within it tried to stand. She watched it fail and fall. Soon, she said. Stannis had left her without the courtesy of goodbye, and she had accepted it as one accepts a change in the wind, with adjustments, not complaint. She had seen a crown in flames and a sword. She had seen a stag with its heart opened and a shadow drinking. She had seen a woman with pale hair standing in a field of fire holding 3 leashes in her fist and looked again, perplexed, to see that she held only one and it was a child's hand. Daenerys, unaware of any red woman's thoughts, sat with the Dash Khaleen and tried to learn the language of their silk. They spoke not of war or riding but of how to keep a child from swallowing a bead, and how to eat a grass that would keep milk from turning, and how to listen when a man in love with his own fear told you what must be done. She learned to braid with her fingers and to unbraid with her patience. She learned, for real, not as a thing one says and does not believe, that a woman can change a people not by a single law shouted from horseback but by the way she makes her son sleep and the way she asks for meat and the way she refuses to laugh when a girl is brought in sobbing. She did not make a proclamation. She took one knife from one hand and put it into the fire, slowly, until the heat bit the hand of the man who held it, and he let it fall with a curse, and nobody laughed. Jorah watched and thought he had never in his life seen anyone rule with so little theater and so much result. He was ashamed of himself in 100 old ways and comforted by one new one. He was here. A man cannot always atone. He can sometimes accompany. Robb Stark won a small battle and lost a small village and felt both as bruises, distinct but deep. He wrote to his father that he had learned the smell of fear in horses and that it was more unsettling than in men. He wrote to his mother and did not tell her that he had taken a wound in his arm that bled enough to make 2 men argue about how stubborn their lord was. He did not tell her because he had begun to understand that he could bear his own pain more easily than her fear. Catelyn read what he had written and pressed the paper to her mouth and wished that letters could give back breath. Sansa learned a new courtesy: how to speak to a woman who is no longer queen and will be again if she has anything to say about it, and to say nothing of either fact. She ordered her own dresses and chose grays she would once have found drab and discovered that she liked, occasionally, not being a flower. She walked with Septa Mordain and prayed as if the gods listened in order to be moved by the shape of a girl's mouth. She did not expect movement. She found, instead, that she was strengthened by the act of believing she might not be alone, even if alone she was. Arya made faces and ran with boys who did not know their own names and learned to step on silent parts of stairs and to make cats ignore her with a kind of mind she had not known she owned. Tyrion held Lannisport by wit and wine and the efficient hanging of thieves in pairs as his father had suggested. He left a note upon each neck: "This is for the city, not the lords. The people approved in the way people approve of order that leaves them room to cheat a little and live." He met with a Braavosi merchant who told him quietly that ships in Pentos had begun to be purchased by men who pretended not to be Illyrio's men, and that those ships had been seen near Norvos with horses in their bellies. Tyrion wrote to his sister under separate seal: "If you mean to play a new game while the old one is still killing men, be sure you can play 2 boards at once." He did not expect her to read it. He expected her to throw it into a fire and watch the wax gutter with the same satisfaction she took in other melting things. The winter that had not yet come sent scouts. Thin knives of cold, nights that sharpened breath. A skin of ice on puddles that broke when boys stamped and then reformed by morning. Robert ordered the cellars stocked with more grain than the council thought necessary and paid the difference in coin. He did not have by promising Tyrells that he would look favorably upon their next petition and mean it. He went to the yard and threw a hammer at a post as if to remember. He laughed when it stuck. He looked older and younger in different lights, and people said it was the king returning to himself and other people said it was the man disappearing into the crown. Ned saw neither. He saw only his friend doing the hardest work he had ever set himself to, becoming steady. When the first white raven from the citadel arrived, ponderous and significant, the city lifted its head as if a hand had put a bit between its teeth. The bird shook itself and looked around as if to say, "Why are you surprised?" The note it bore was clear and did not care about men's moods. The long summer is ended. Winter begins. The words were ink on vellum and yet changed the air in the room as surely as a door opened to the cold. "Of course," Robert said, taking the strip and reading and rereading as if the meaning would grow fatter. "Of course, we will have winter and war together. The gods are parsimonious with their cruelties. They like to use one to make the other sting more."
Ned nodded.
"We have done most everything we can." Robert laughed. "Which will be enough to make us think we failed by inches instead of miles when we fail." "We might not," Ned said. He said it not as hope but as a task. On the wall, the white ravens meant nothing to the cold already there. They perched with offended dignity on beams and pecked at crumbs with the exact manner of their cousins. Men went out and some returned and their beards crackled when they laughed. Samwell Tarly did not laugh much but learned to stand with men who did and to hold a spear as if it could be useful and to read a sky that the maesters did not have names for. He wrote to his own father and did not send the letter. He wrote to a girl he remembered and did not send that either. He sent back to Old Town a series of questions about things that had first been written down when the first men had not yet decided whether writing things down made them suspicious. He received replies that made him glad and ill with fear in equal parts. The last time this many things were reported in this order, a long night had followed. The text did not say what order of things men should do to make the next morning arrive. In Vis Dothrak, Daenerys walked the halls of what passes for neutrality in a world of raids and thought often of the shape of ships seen in dreams. She asked 3 different men from 3 different cities to explain to her the cost of transporting 5,000 horses across a sea. Each said that it would be a fortune and then tried to name it. She listened and measured and came away with an understanding that gold was a substitute. What would buy the sea was not coin but audacity and time, and a story told well enough to make men believe that what they were about to do had been done before. She began, quietly, to put that story together. She spoke to boys about the horse's courage, and to women about beds with wooden legs that did not rock, and to men about fields where no one had ever ridden and they could be first. She did not lie outright. She put truth and dream into a braid and wound it around her son's wrist as if it would protect him from falls. When she held her dragon's eggs, not because she thought they would hatch, but because they were heavy and cool and made her think of things older than men's claims. She felt nothing but stone, and that, oddly, comforted her. She was glad for a thing that did not change under her hand. Mance Rayder sat his fire beyond the wall and felt the cold settle into him as if he were a chair it meant to occupy. He had not yet earned the crown of twigs that men would later speak of. He had not yet decided whether men would speak of it at all. He had seen blue eyes in a ma, and who would not rot and did not care for it. He had seen a woman sit down in the snow and open her mouth to sing to a baby who did not cry and did not breathe, and he had lifted her up and told her she would walk now, and saving her body felt like wanting more than he had wanted in years. He had not yet sent rangers out in all directions. He had not yet gathered the rumor of 100 tribes into a people. He stared into the fire and thought, almost abstractly, that the world would require more of him than cleverness and furs. He thought of going south and asking like a beggar, "Let us through." He had not yet decided that he would do it even if the answer was no. In Lannisport, Cersei paced the rooms given her and could not wear the same path twice because her fury changed its shape and would not be contained in a single line. The first week, she wrote 6 letters and then burned them with a deliberate slowness that served as confession and titillation both. The second, she refused 3 meals to keep a morsel of control and then ate in the middle of the night until she felt ill. The third, she sent for a girl with pale hair and a waist as narrow as a snake's and saw her quickly and dismissed her sooner because the pleasure of being looked at with fear fades when it is all that looks upon you. She carried a tiny vial around her neck that she did not open. She lay awake and thought of her father and her brother and her son, and when she could not bear that, she thought of her own face and rehearsed how she would hold it when she returned to the city and made it hers again. She believed time was a road and not the sea. She would learn otherwise, but not yet. In the Red Keep, Varys placed 3 small stones upon a board that was not a board. One was black, one was red, one was the color of old bone. Littlefinger placed none and stole one when the spider was not looking. Not because he needed it, but because he liked to take. Pycelle misplaced 2 scrolls and pretended not to know they had been misplaced and smiled with the inward pleasure of a man whose importance is equal to his own inventory of importance. Barristan Selmy sharpened his blade and thought of Rhaegar again. Not with grief now, but with the clean pain of memory cut to the quick. Robert and Ned sat with maps between them and did a thing men seldom notice. They made choices that would, if not save the world, at least let it fail later than it might have. They set watches. They set stores. They wrote to men who did not love them and asked for what those men did not wish to give and made those men feel honored when they gave it. They forgave small betrayals because they did not have time to punish them and punished 2 large ones because not to would have signaled permission. They sent a boy with a talent for tongues to bravos to ask questions not as a king but as a clerk. They sent a hard man to Duskendale to see whether the docks were soft. They did not celebrate their successes. They ate, slept, bled, and made another list. When the first word came, thin and reedy, a rumor carried by a Lyseni crewman who had sold his or for a chance at dice, that a cluster of brown sails had put in at a small cove north of Pentos with horses' screams inside them, Ned did not say Illyrio's name aloud. He only circled a place on a map no one else would have found interesting and wrote beside it, "Watch the shore like a thief watches a market." Robert said, "If she comes, we meet her in the field." Ned finished for him. Robert nodded. We told ourselves the truth once. We will do it again. Mercy bought us the shape of this world, Ned said. We will see what it purchases next. Far out upon the grass, where no one would move a stone for 100 years, a boy with a carved bone rattle dropped it and took 3 steps and did not fall. His mother watched him and laughed, low in her throat, and then wept a little and did not know why. In the true north, where trees think their own thoughts too slowly for men to hear, a thing that had been a man and forgotten it turned its face toward the sound of horns it could not hear and began to walk. In a tent near the Mummers' Ford, men whispered by firelight of a red priestess seen in a fishing village, and one of them crossed himself and turned his face away from the flame as if it had tried to kiss him. Night fell. The city lit its 1,000 small lights, stubborn and brief. The sea breathed. The wind traveled from one story to another as if it were a messenger exchanging courtesies. Above, the unconcerned stars arranged themselves and did not teach their language to any man. Within those indifferent patterns, the very interested lives went on. A king who had decided, for once, to be better than his instincts. A hand who had learned to count beans and blood with equal gravity. A queen practicing for her return. A brother making a city love him enough not to starve him. A boy at a wall learning the names of cold. A woman across the sea teaching men who rode storms to be something quieter for an hour at a time. No trumpets, still. No prophecy spoken aloud and recognized as such. Only the old work of holding and the new work of turning. A degree at a time, a face toward winter without closing the eyes. And at the heart of it, the small refusal that had begun all this. A king's fat hand staying itself from ordering knives. In that refusal was a corridor of air long enough for children to run in. In that running, futures stretched, kinked, twisted, and sang.